Hey y'all, it's Jess with Roots and Refuge Farm. I'm headed into my garden right now and I want to talk specifically today to you beginner gardeners. Those of you who really desire to grow your own food, but you don't have any experience with it. I grew up around gardening. My mom was an avid gardener. The process of growing things was never one that was foreign to me. However, I didn't successfully grow food until really the last few years. I had a lot of failures and I learned a lot of lessons, honestly, the hard way. But I have a tendency to get really intimidated whenever I go into forums or start watching videos and there's a lot of basic information that's assumed. Now, if you will just start gardening, you will learn all these things, but you'll have to learn by your failures. Now, if you do tons of research and ask lots of questions, you're still gonna have to learn by your failures. But if from the front end, you will embrace the mindset that this is a journey and a classroom that is going to mold you in the process of becoming a good and successful gardener, you'll never feel like you failed. Even now, I'm walking down these rows of tomato plants. It's the end of July. They're struggling pretty intensely. I don't know how much longer they're gonna produce through the heat. I'm gonna start a second round of tomatoes since I live here in the South and we have a long growing season. So I'll get some more later this year and I'll get some more next year, and I've put up everything that I could that I've already gotten out of these plants. But I don't feel like a failure because these plants are dying. These plants are dying because it's hot outside. I've done the best I could, and even in the mistakes that I've made, I still learned. I still grew. So I didn't fail. So my first piece of advice to you beginner gardeners is to go ahead and remove the pass-fail mentality from your mind. If you'll go ahead and decide in your heart from the front end that you're gonna do this as a passion and a hobby, and that you're gonna enjoy every step of the process, it won't feel like a failure to you. The fruit, the harvest, that's definitely a reward. That is honestly what I'm sure motivates most everyone to vegetable garden, is they're imagining the harvest. They're imagining successfully growing their own food. But if you keep your eyes on that, you'll hate the season of planting and of sowing and of maintaining and pulling weeds and pruning. And honestly, the fruit consists of a very small portion of the process of gardening. But if you'll put in your mind that the whole process is something that is going to be good for you, that's going to build character for you, that's going to teach you things, that's going to aid you along the journey of becoming more self-sustaining, then it takes the pressure off the harvest, and it means that you can gain so much more through the process of gardening. Now, what spurred me to do this video is that I love to invite people into my garden, and I've found that even for those who have not had a whole lot of experience with gardens, they're still drawn to it. They're still interested in it. People who have no desire whatsoever to grow food can still appreciate walking through a garden like this and seeing food growing. But I found that a lot of people ask questions that I thought were obvious. Now, I don't feel like there are stupid questions. I think that we have to learn, and there should always be security and safety in order to ask things that we don't know. But it did surprise me whenever people came into my garden and said things like, oh wow, I had no idea that vegetable plants had flowers on them. The flowers are there to attract the pollinators. That's an okra plant. These little blossoms, this is a tomato. And every single one of these plants that is going to bear fruit, it has flowers on it. So just a really basic crash course in botany, which is the study of plants. Now this is pretty surface level stuff, but essentially a fruit is a structure in a plant that holds seeds. So everything that you grow to eat that holds seeds is called a fruit, like a pepper or a tomato. You don't typically think of those as fruits, but they are. They hold seeds. And all of those develop on plants that first put off a blossom. The blossom attracts the pollinators, like bees. That's why bees are so important, and that's why it's such a big deal that bees are falling prey to a lot of agricultural practices like spraying with harmful chemicals. Because if we don't have pollinators, we don't get fruit. Once the pollen is mixed in that flower, it begins developing the fruit that will hold the seeds, which is essentially like the ovary of that plant. There are also what we would term vegetables, which that in itself is not a term that holds a lot of weight in botany, because essentially when we're eating a vegetable, we're just eating part of a plant. Now, for instance, if I grow a carrot, I put a seed in the ground and it begins to develop the plant. The root grows deep. Now that's the part of the plant that we're used to eating, the root. That's what a carrot is. It puts off leaves and stems, and if we don't pick that carrot and eat its root, it will continue to grow as a plant and it will put off flowers, and those flowers will then develop seeds. Now with a fruit, we can pick the fruit and eat the fruit, and the plant continues to grow and it continues to put off fruit. But with the vegetable, whenever we pick that plant, whenever we cut the stem off of chard to eat the stem and the leaves, we have started to eat that plant. With things like chard and kale and leafy greens, lettuces, you can pick some of it and leave enough for the plant to continue to live. But if you're eating a root vegetable, a radish or a turnip or a beet or a carrot, when you pull that up, you have ended the life of that plant and it will not go to seed. None of that really matters in growing food. I mean, you can grow food without understanding that stuff, but I'm of the mind that the more you understand about the nature of the things you're trying to grow, the more success that you'll have in growing them. The bottom line of that, though, is that plants need pollinators. So keep that in mind whenever you make choices about your pest and maintenance practices, that if you begin broadcasting harmful chemicals all over your garden, you could kill your pollinators and therefore lose out on getting your fruit. Now let's talk about the very basic things that plants need to thrive. They need nutrients in their soil, they need water, and they need sun. Now, this is pretty basic and you can get a lot more in depth than this, but I don't want to overwhelm you. The first thing is healthy soil grows healthy plants. You can do a lot of things right, but if you don't address the issue of your soil, you can end up with a really unsuccessful harvest. There are a lot of opinions on how to go about this. The most simple way to make sure you have good soil is build raised beds and bring the soil in. Now, that is not the most cost-effective way, and truly, I understand that not everybody has the capability to do that because it takes some sort of carpentry skill to put stuff together. It does take a lot of manual labor to bring soil into the beds, and it costs money. I did multiple gardens in containers and in the ground. My first really successful garden was raised beds. Now, as you can see, much of my garden is raised beds. I have just started to branch out into planting in the ground again now that I know more about soil amendment. Now, you can go to like your local big box store, home improvement store, hardware store, garden center, and get a soil testing kit. And it will essentially tell you the pH level of your soil, and you can go into the depths of amending your soil to be exactly what it needs. Different plants thrive in different soil pH levels, but if you want to keep it as simple as possible, you need to know that soil needs lots of rich organic matter in order to be healthy for plants. Now, you can have more success if you cater your soil to the specific needs of what you're planting in it. That's absolutely true. But if that is overwhelming to you and you need to know what is the baseline, amend your soil with rich organic matter. That is to say compost, peat, manure that has been aged. Anything that you buy at the store is going to be aged. If you have animals of your own, there are different requirements as far as the aging of manure. You can put rabbit manure immediately on a garden and it won't burn your plants, but a chicken manure has to be aged and composted for a certain amount of time before you put it on there. I'm just going to tell you that if you want to use manure from your animals, do a quick search. It's easy to find out the composting requirement for different kinds of manures for your plants. I use a lot of composted animal manures and the beddings from their barns, which typically end up with a lot of manure in it. For amending my soil, we have goats, we have chickens, and we have horses, and so we use all of those as well as compost. Composting is not difficult. You can start doing that, but as of getting started right now, if you do have to go purchase something, it's pretty simple. You can get all kinds of compost available at the store. If you're trying to do a larger garden and you're bringing in soil for raised beds or amending soil in a large level, check with local nurseries instead of going and buying stuff by the bag, because a lot of times you can get things significantly cheaper if you can take a truck or a trailer and load it up at those nurseries. That way you're not dealing with individual bags. You'll have to use shovels and wheelbarrows, but it can save you a lot of money. So in a nutshell, you're going to want to make sure your soil is rich in organic matter. The rich organic matter helps that soil to drain well and to hold little pockets of air which your plants need to survive. And you can add organic matter back into your soil with composted animal manures, with composted vegetation, with things like peat moss, worm castings. All of these different things are great amendments to go back into your soil. Make sure that it is loose, that it's aerated, and that it is full of that dark, rich matter that is going to help your plants thrive. The next big step in soil health is mulch. The soil is full of all kinds of living organisms, things like worms and microbes and different insects, and these are all very beneficial things. soil that is full of life is healthy soil. So one thing that can make a huge difference in the health of your garden is mulch. Now, as you see here, I use straw mulch. That is what I've used for the last few years, and it does pretty well. One of the downsides is sometimes you get some grass seeds in it, but even with that, the weeds are significantly less with the mulch than without it. You can use other mulches like grass clippings, shredded leaves that you have raked up from your yard, and a very popular one is wood chips. Now, we are actually going to be transitioning towards wood chips. I can't really teach you a whole lot about that because I haven't done it yet. However, you definitely want to put some sort of covering down over your soil. This cuts back significantly on the amount of weeds that you have to maintain. It holds in moisture and it makes your waterings last longer and the rain lasts longer as far as keeping your soil moist. And it helps from splashback whenever it does rain. It keeps the soil from splashing back up on the plants, which can cause sickness in your plants. If you are planting from transplants and you are putting plants directly in the ground, then you can just mulch as soon as they're up there. If you're planting from seed, is what I do if there's mulch already down is I just make a little spot. Here, this is some older mulch, but I would just move it to the side. This soil needs to be amended. This is where we're about to start on our fall garden, and we're going to start working on this soil. But I just move the soil to the sides, spread it out, and plant my seed right there. And as that seedling comes up and gets more sturdy, then I'll mulch more around. The next thing to know is that your garden needs sun. To grow a vegetable garden, you want to account for it having 8 hours of direct sun every day. Now, if you'll notice right here, I'm standing in the shade in my garden. This little area of my garden is shaded by this tree until about 11 o'clock in the morning, at which point the sun comes up above that tree, and then this area gets direct sun for the next 9 hours. A little bit of shade is not a bad thing, especially if you live in a really hot area. Your plants will thank you for a break from the sun. You just need to be aware of where you're putting your garden. Just watch how the sun goes over it every day. Take note of when it becomes in direct sun and when it becomes shaded again, and just make sure that you're giving it a full 8 hours of sun every day. The next basic need of a plant is water. This is where you need to get honest with yourself when it comes to planning where you're going to put your garden. You need to really ask yourself, if I have to drag a hose or carry buckets of water back to the very back far corner of my yard every day, will I actually do that? Set yourself up to do well in the beginning by being honest with what you're actually capable of or willing to do. If you know you are the kind of person who will leave that garden back in the back corner of your yard to dry up and die while you think, oh, I got to get around to watering that, don't put it there. Put it right by your house. Put it somewhere where it's easy. Set yourself up to do well by just being honest with yourself on the front end. Now, you might not necessarily have to water your plants every single day. Some plants do best when they've been watered every third day. However, you are going to want to keep an eye on it, and they will tell you whenever they need some water. They start drooping. If they start wilting, they definitely need water at that point. And you will find out for your region, based on your temperatures and how much rainfall you're getting, how much you need to water. Actually, more common for beginning gardeners to overwater their plants than to underwater them. I mean, it becomes very obvious when they're underwatered because they look like they're dying. However, overwatering your plants, watering them every single day or watering them a whole lot real regularly, it can actually cause them to drown. They can shrink up, get spots on their leaves, they can get all kinds of sickness. What I like to do is I like to wait about every 2 or 3 days. And it's hot here where I live, but I like to wait about every 2 or 3 days. And then when my plants show the very, very, very first signs of needing water, like their leaves begin curling up or they get just the slightest bit wilted, that's whenever I will water my plants. Some years it rains a whole lot or it rains very little, and you can't really control that at all. So you kind of just have to go with the flow and understand that you're partnering with nature to keep these plants watered. Another thing to consider in your garden placement is the drainage. If it is an area that is low-lying and a lot of water comes and sits, you don't want to put your garden there. Plants can drown. You need a well-draining place in order to have a successful vegetable garden. My next advice when you're planning your first vegetable garden is to grow what you eat. I love to try new things. I love to try new experiments, and I have grown some things that I did not care to eat after I gave them a try and I didn't grow them again. But when you are first getting started, don't feel pressured by the seed catalogs or the beautiful pictures that you've seen on social media of other people's harvests. If your family does not like certain things, don't grow them. I love tomatoes, so that was where I really found my passion for gardening, was growing tomatoes, because whenever I went to the store, the delicious heirloom tomatoes that I so enjoyed were $5 a pound, and I thought, man, this is really gonna alleviate my grocery bill to grow these things. Think about the ingredients for the things that you like to make. If you eat a lot of salads or breakfast scrambles with bell peppers, grow bell peppers. If you make a lot of salsa, grow tomatoes and jalapenos. If your family really doesn't like something, don't make that one of your first gardening ventures. Now, later on down the road, you might decide to try new things, and you might decide that you like them. We never ate radishes until I started growing them, and now we roast them with a little oil and salt and pepper. They're amazing, and it's something that I now grow a ton of. However, when you're first getting started, really stick to growing what you love. One piece of advice that you are gonna find if you Google tips for beginning gardeners, and it is pretty unanimously given, is to not overwhelm yourself trying a bunch of varieties. Now, I mostly agree with that. I really do. I mostly think that if you've never grown tomatoes before, don't try to grow 20 different kinds, because sometimes different varieties can be really titchy, you don't really know, and then you don't know if you've done something wrong or if it's just not a very easy variety to grow. I do think that you should talk to other gardeners, find out what grows in your region, and grow some widely successful crop when you're first starting out. But I think there should be a little wiggle room to try new things, because I think the excitement of growing a variety that you've never seen or tasted before, I think it is a great learning experience, and honestly, it's a huge reason of why I fell in love with gardening. I love growing different heirlooms and different things that are not available in stores. So while yes, if you are planning on your first garden, find a handful of varieties that you know are going to do well for you, that are essentially foolproof varieties that are going to be kind to a beginning gardener. But if you look in that seed catalog and you see something that completely stuns you and wows you and you really want to try it, my encouragement is to do that. Just don't get carried away to a place where you're going to get overwhelmed or discouraged. Another widely given piece of advice is to keep it small and manageable, and with that I do agree as I walk around this 10,000 square foot garden. My first really successful gardening experience was in 2 raised 4 by 4 foot beds right outside my front door. I put it in a place that got plenty of sun. We brought in soil so that we had a really good healthy growing medium, and it was right out my front door where I could easily water it. It was right there, so I couldn't forget about it. I walked past it every time I walked out of my house, and I only grew a handful of things. The success in that garden was such an encouragement to me to keep going. The next year I added twice as much space, and then the next year we began building this really large garden that I so love to share with you all. So yes, if you are brand new to gardening, I don't think that trying a really huge space is what's best for you yet. However, I want to encourage you, it won't be very long. I think one really solid garden experience of a handful of 4 by 4 foot beds, you know, a small 6 by 10 foot plot, one really good successful gardening year, and by successful I don't necessarily even mean a ton of harvest. I mean where you really learn a lot about how plants grow and what is required of them and what your capacity is. I really think that really gives you a grip on what you're going to be able to handle. Next, do a little research on the varieties that you're planting. I get tagged a lot on places like Instagram where people are like, help, you know, why are my peas doing so poorly? And it's like July, you know, and it's really, really hot. Sweet peas don't grow in the heat. Same thing with any sort of like root vegetables, carrots or radishes or anything like that. If you plant them and it's 100 degrees outside, before they develop much of a root at all, before you can actually eat them, they're gonna sprout up a bunch of flowers, and at that point, you get no radishes. There are different seasons for different things, and it would be really difficult for me to try to sum that up in a nutshell because it is so dependent on what region you live in. So what you do need to know is, first off, find out what zone you're in. You can do a quick Google search and type in what zone is your city or your zip code, and you'll find out, for instance, I'm in Central Arkansas and I'm in zone 7B. From there, you can find out first frost dates for your zone. I could type in first frost dates for 7B, and it will tell me, based on the averages for my area, when it's going to get cold, too cold to grow frost tender vegetables. My first frost date of this year is going to be October 27th. Now I don't know if it'll actually happen on that day, but it'll be around then. It's just an estimate for planning purposes. And in the spring, you can look up last frost dates for zone 7B. And typically our last frost date in this area is at the end of March. And this is where you start your planning. This is when you know when you're gonna put things in the ground. It's very important to adhere to these things and don't get hasty. This year, our last frost date was April 1st and it sleeted on April 17th. You have to watch the forecast. You have to be aware of what's going on. There's a reason why the old farmers used to, they still do, go into feed stores and just immediately start talking about the weather. That is not just a cliche for shallow conversation. That's because to a farmer, the weather is everything. I know all the time at any point, if we have rain forecasted, I know what the highs are, I know what the lows are. I'm completely aware. I check the weather every single morning before I even get out of bed. And then you need to learn the needs of certain plants. This is something that you will learn with time, and it's something that is probably going to take individual research based on the type of plant that you're trying to plant. My last piece of gardening advice to you, beginner gardener, is very simple. Grow a garden. Just do it. You're going to learn and you're going to get better, and you can grow food. This is not rocket science. Right now, there are 3 tomato plants in the flower bed right next to my front door. I did not plant them there. I assume a bird that was probably feasting down here on the plants that I did plant flew up there and left some seeds and some droppings. Tomato plants grow there every single year. I do not plant them, but I let them grow. It's kind of silly to have tomato plants growing in my flower bed whenever I literally have 115 plants growing down in my garden. You would think that I would take that space and plant something pretty. However, those tomato plants are a reminder to me that this stuff wants to grow. And though its odds are better with my help, I don't ever want to come into the mindset that I really had a whole lot at all to do with this. Gardening is an incredible reminder that this is not our plan, and although we can partner with the design of nature and we can partner with the fact that things do want to grow, and we can build pretty garden beds and we can amend the soil and we can control most of the factors that help these things grow. Honestly, it's beyond us. Gardens grow because seeds grow, because they want to, because they were designed to. And so I want to encourage you, don't overthink this. Don't be discouraged. And if you plant something and it gets completely ravaged by insects, do a little research and find out how to combat those things. But don't give up. I hope that by the end of our lives, whenever we can look back and say that we've been gardening for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe even longer if we're lucky, that we can say, man, I really learned a lot. But in that time, at the end of our lives, when we have been doing this for decades, I hope that we have finally fully grasped the fact that we were fortunate enough to partner with this. We never became super masters of it. It's just something that we learn how to partner with. So please, 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 if I teach you nothing else in this video, let me teach you that you can grow food. You can grow a garden. Get rid of the pass-fail mentality. Learn everything you can. Make the circumstances as ideal as possible, but enjoy the process. Don't take it too seriously. I do hope this helps you. I hope that you will feel encouraged and brave enough to make an attempt at your first garden. Thank you so much for watching. I bless you. Until next time.